Hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of Truth Be Told. We are Soul Evolution Collaborative, and it is our joy to be here with you looking at this theme of the week, of the month, of the year, all of it. So tonight, we are following up on our conversation, living, everyday wonder. This month, we're looking at relationships, and, I got to tell you, it's really been a good time. And the way that it's unfolded, we started in that first week with the relationship of self. And that was pretty powerful just to realize how that is like the basis of all our relationships, starting right there. And then we evolved into relationships one on one. And then last week looked at how, we compare like fitting in as opposed to like really belonging. And it's led to where we are this week, which is the way that groups then interact and have relationships with other groups, how we are out there in society. And I got to tell you, it's a little crazy out there right now if you haven't noticed. So when we're talking about groups, a lot of times, we have our kind of compartmentalized group, and we have, that's where we form our identity, and we really latch on to those things that we believe with. And so our relationships with other groups quite often can be very contentious. And the interesting thing, if you just look at the division like here in the United States, or even take it further, really, it's a lot of ideologies are like globally kind of competing right now. And if you look at either side of any of these kind of common arguments, so both sides are like so adamant that they are 100% right, and are not going to go down without fighting, not even going to like open up to conversation with the other side, because we are so convinced that we are absolutely right, the other side is absolutely wrong. I know for myself, I believe I'm absolutely right in the ideologies that I'm adhering to, but that's not working. So this is right now, like, is the time on this planet that we have to really start to do things differently, like radically different. All of our time in history, this yelling back and forth, this proving, this right fighting, just isn't going to cut it anymore. Really never has cut it, but it's gotten to a point now where we've seen civilizations rise and fall, and it feels kind of even a little more global this time than just the individual civilizations. Not to say that the civilization of the United States isn't at risk, which everything always is, but it feels a little more serious right now. And if that's something worth trying to repair. So here's a big part: just trying to do things really different when it comes to the different groups. You know, trying to radically do things different. Like I said, people have been kind of unwilling to even open up into conversation with the opposing viewpoints. So that's one way right there, is just being willing to be heard and allowing other people just to be heard, going in with an idea of, we don't need to even, we can agree to disagree, and just listen, let one side just spill it out, with listening without arguing, without counterpointing, and then in turn being able to just voice yourself. And it's amazing how, if you've ever done any relationship work, any kind of couples therapy or anything like that, just allowing each other to speak what they're feeling seems to soften the edges. The argument softens down, and then we could kind of start to see like our common goals, our common desires, and that opens things up. So a couple, as we lean into empathy, Ryan's going to really take us into some deep stuff later here in just a little bit. But a couple of science of mind, like core concepts that kind of help us lead into that. Two concepts right off the bat are oneness and wholeness. Oneness in that we are all. Everything that exists is a manifestation of the infinite, of the divine, and that is spirit. There's really only one thing, if you could step outside and look at it, and that is, kind of a counterpart to wholeness. And wholeness just implies that everything is that one thing. And so in the big picture, when you step back, there really isn't all these opposing views that we get to experience here in this world, this physical world, but it's just the polarities of the same thing. So opening up to this idea that we are all one, everything is part of it, And then the third part that I'd like to, concept to draw our attention to is the reciprocal nature of the universe, cause and effect. And a big part of this cause and effect is the golden rule. So if you look at, Eastern religions and traditions, Western religions and traditions, indigenous cultures, pretty much any philosophy that's ever existed, there's everyone has some version of the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And so if we open up to that and remind ourselves that, us and them, there is no us and them. There's only us. That's all that exists. We're all that one thing. And when we cling to that, to wanting to be right, that is going to create that reciprocal nature in the universe of an opposing viewpoint that is going to cling to that, to want to be right. So we have to learn how to radically think different for, our future. If we want to be heard, we have to be willing to hear others. And here's where it comes through, this idea of relationships and being open and living everyday wonder. Every time that we take a personal shift in our own life, just catch ourselves one time, before we react, and remember to respond. When we put intention into our relationships, every time that we make that individual shift within ourselves, that is a win. It's a collective shift, or a shift for all of humanity. It seems, minuscule that you're only one little part of it, but we are all part of this one. There is collective consciousness that we all share in. So any win, any individual work that we do, you really are shifting all of humanity. So keep up the work, enjoy. Thanks for being here. That's a good sign that you're shifting already. So tonight it is relationships. It's complicated. Part 4, beyond us and them. So sit back and enjoy this episode of Truth Be Told.
Relationships can be complicated, whether it is the relationship with yourself, relationship one-on-one with somebody else, or the groups that we are a part of, or how that group interacts with the world. Relationships can be complicated. And this week we are looking at the relationship of the group that we are in, how we are a part of that group, and how that group interacts with the world. And wow, if there were ever a potential for complication when you introduce that many people into one setting, it certainly gets complicated. And so this week it feels like there are so many different angles to approach this topic from. But let's boil it down to one that I think might be the most important, or one of the most important for sure. When we are in a group, one of the biggest challenges is how that group then interacts as a group with the rest of the world. And this is an issue, I'm going to say issue more than challenge, because not only is it challenging, but it can potentially create greater issues instead of solving issues. It can create more problems instead of solving problems. Historically, the groups that we have created, the groups that we have come to be a part of, have actually created greater issues outside of that group than they have helped to solve. And I think this is because historically we have joined groups as a means of identification. We are joining groups, we are becoming part of a larger whole in order to gain more of an identity, which is certainly part of being in a group, is that greater identity. And I think we have let that identity, that group identity, become so solidified that not only does it exclude and keep others out, but it also creates a divide beyond the borders of that group, beyond the premise of that group, beyond the walls of that group. There is now a divide, and we have a us and them mentality that gets created instead of us and us, or whatever else is possible. There's so much more possible. If we flip that idea around, how does this group interact with the world? And I think, by and large, for so many of us, our groups have stopped short at that point of, yes, we need this place to self-identify. And so there has been this very me first, I kind of mentality in the group. I need this group for me to help define who I am. I need this group to help me tell me who I am so that I can be a more solid version of me, or at least I think that's the idea. That is the goal of our very me-centric perspective on groups in general. What if we were to turn that around? What if that's not the point? What if we're not supposed to create this division? And yet, for so many of us, I think we have kind of stopped. The model we have been shown, by and large, has stopped at find the group to belong to. And anyone who doesn't believe in the thing that group believes in is probably wrong. Or in some cases, the belief is that they're definitely wrong. And then we just have this divide. And so the issue is we need groups to belong to. We're hardwired for belonging. We talked about that last week. And yet, how do we take that need for belonging and allow that to echo and amplify in a way that benefits everybody in an outward direction? How do we have a premise where the group we're a part of does not hurt others? How do we have a premise where the group that we are a part of actually uplifts the rest of the world? And I think for many of us, that is a new paradigm. Maybe an idea that's not brand new, but certainly a way of being that is new to many of us. How do we create groups that actually go out into the world and do good? Groups that aren't just for the sake of self-identity.
I love it.
You know, it's interesting, even just like listening to yourself. I mean, a little weird still, but always maybe. But it's like that. There's, you know, I said very early on in that segment, like there's so many aspects to look at, and the groups that we form, and then there's the groups that we were like born into, and then there's the groups that we get put in by others. And I mean, so it's like, oh yeah, oh man, like there's so many different. I have so many thoughts, even just watching my own take on this. I'm like, oh yeah, he didn't say that. He didn't say that. He didn't say that. You know, it's like, oh.
But it is challenging. I mean, when we find those groups, and then I think it's human nature. I don't want to give away the possibility too much because that's coming up, but it is in human nature to do that. We find these groups, you know, belonging and safety, and some of us maybe for the first time ever. And, you know, I remember when I found groups like that, and found spiritual communities like that. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is it. Okay. Hunker down, you know, and because especially if you haven't experienced it on a, you know, on a really intense level, it becomes this kind of clinging. I'm going to hold on to it with white knuckles, and I'm not going to let it go. And that looks like holding on to ideologies, holding on to frameworks, holding on to being right, holding on to like only my viewpoint is the viewpoint, the be all end all of viewpoints. And it becomes this weird something that, you know, belonging that is expansive somehow becomes like this constrictive lack sort of thing when we view it that way. And I think that that's what we're talking about, really taking that belonging a step further.
Yeah.
But yes, it's about creating safe spaces, creating communities, creating those places to belong. And, you know, and I think the and is the key. Yeah. And I think that's what's calling for us to to navigate and to figure out now more than ever, honestly.
Well, I remember this make me think back to when the lockdowns first came about, when COVID started becoming big news, and shortly after that, there was like this catapulting forward feeling in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And I think, it's probably going to be years before we really started to feel the influence of that widespread. But I think some of the catapulting forward was a shaking up of some of the paradigms that just were the norm.
Yeah.
And I think some of that was how we do relationships. And I think for a lot of people, probably most people, relationships were done, approached, lived through, engaged in through this place of like, I have hurt, I'm not necessarily conscious of it, it creates a need, and I'm looking for a relationship that meets that need.
Yeah.
And so we're like, it's like reaching out and like sucking onto somebody else's energy and feelings in life, and like, you fill my need. And so we're like engaging from this. It's certainly a place of lack, but it's also this place of like hurt and pain.
Yeah.
And unacknowledged hurt and pain. And it seems as if, I think COVID was kind of one of those times where we did like that cosmic catapulting forward of like, okay, enough. It's time for a new approach to how we do this. And I think that's what we can see come up in what are some different ways we can do group dynamics? What are some different ways, like, we can look beyond just that group dynamic? And honestly, I think the groups that we are a part of are now being asked to like mirror that individual process, right? It's like micro, macro. So the same things we talked about with our self relationships and how our self plays into the group, the same exact thing I think is playing out. We're starting to see the self identity of the group and how that group then interacts. And I think we, in the past, for most of people, our groups have interacted out of that place of hurt, right? We've interacted out of that, my group, like we're saying, my group needs to be right. My group needs to be seen. And like those things are true. Like, it's not any less true, but the difference, just like with the individual, when we can go to a place of being part of a healthy group makes a stronger individual. Healthy groups reaching out to do more good in the world create a stronger group, not a less. It doesn't diminish the group,
right?
Which I think is certainly the opposite of what we see a lot of.
Yeah.
A part of what you said in your segment that was powerful to me is like, moving to a group then that like uplifts other groups. And like, that's kind of like the question that we constantly ask in our household when there's squabbles happening. Like, okay, well, what did you just say to them? Like, was that something that's going to uplift, or is that something that's going to break down? Because we're here for each other. And if we can't try to intentionally always do things that uplift the other, then we're creating more problems for the person that our loved one that's right here with us. So like, was that remark that you just said to your sister really something that's going to uplift your sister or not? And and so I think that is really a big part of asking these questions of the groups and how we show up in the world. We really have to start to think like, we all benefit when we can uplift each other. When you were talking about like COVID, I think I felt the same way. Like, we took this huge cosmic leap forward. We see things differently now. And, like, just for like examples, like the essential workers, like everybody working in a grocery store right now, putting themselves at risk of getting COVID when we don't know how to deal with this. Essential, and they're heroes. Look at the nurses, look at, paramedics, police officers, all these people that still have to be out there and at risk. Like, and we had like this collective shift, like, yeah, man, these people are essential. And then just like, when you said micro to the macro, when we do our own individual work, we have these ahas. Yes, I get it. All right, I'm shifting. And then, pretty soon afterwards, we're kind of like back into our old habitual way. But there's a new awareness there. It's not all for nothing. It wasn't all wasted. But it kind of feels like that, like talking about like groups of, like just the essential workers, for example, kind of like faded back to where like, people are kind of going back to their grumpy selves when interacting with, public servants and, the like of that. But there was a shift. We just have to continually.
They're essential. But now that that's quieted down, we're still only going to pay them like $12 an hour.
Yeah, we still have
not that essential.
Holders.
Yeah,
the shareholders still have to eat too, so we can't really.
In case you're confused, we're being incredibly sarcastic.
Shocking.
Yeah,
shocking.
Sarcastic.
But it's good.
It's certainly interesting how it mirrors that process a lot. The individual that the group mirrors the individual process. Yeah,
it's almost like there's something to it.
Could be.
Yeah.
We are taking a quick break from your already scheduled program to bring you this special report. As you can see, it can get pretty stormy and rough out here, and now more than ever, we need a place to belong. That place is Soul Evolution Collaborative. This intentional spiritual community has a vision of personal transformation and communal evolution, an authentic way of being, living, and viewing the world. You can find space and shelter in the weekly offerings. Tuesday, 7 p.m. Eastern, Truth Be Told. Thursday, 7 p.m. Eastern, The Gathering, a group experience that provides an opportunity to discuss spiritual principles and how they show up in our own lives. Sunday morning, Stripped Down Sunday at 12:30 Eastern offers a streamlined approach to your Sunday morning experience focused on a weekly theme. And for those looking for an added adventure in intentional community, the Second Sunday Experience, every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern. This is an experience that will demonstrate a new way of doing community. If you'd like to support the vision of SEC and its continued evolution, you can go to soulevolutioncollaborative.org and click on the donate button. All donations are tax deductible and serve to support this evolving ministry in its vision of personal transformation and communal evolution. And now back to your scheduled program, already in progress.
As we've discussed, it is super easy once we have created groups or spaces where belonging is cultivated and actualized to actually want to create our own little bubble or oasis from the outside world. And sometimes we feel like, wow, I've found my people. This is amazing. I think I will just sit here and roll around in it forever. Far away from the world, far away from all the external stuff that I see. And I guess if our goal is individualistic, then that's all well and good. But maybe that's an outdated framework. Okay, actually, I'm just going to say it. That is indeed an outdated framework. So when we begin to explore the idea that hoarding our good actually not only impacts others, but ourselves as well. And the same can be applied to the groups that we form. It's amazing when we can cultivate spaces of safety and belonging. But the totality of those two concepts cannot be fully experienced just within the confines of our own little groups. The full expression of belonging can only be actualized when we're able to then cultivate that beyond the barriers that we've created, whether those barriers are consciously or unconsciously. So how can we take our success in creating belonging in groups and actually use it as a catalyst for impact in the world? What if the answer is empathy? And more specifically, collective empathy. Now, this may bring up more questions like, it can't possibly be that simple. Or, can you teach empathy?
You either have it or you're not. In reality, empathy is actually a learned action made up of 4 components or attributes. And this is according to researcher Brene Brown and many other researchers like her. It is a combination of several skill sets, when cultivated, that can be exercised in a powerful way. Not only in the development of groups where belonging is the norm, but in actually creating a culture within that group to apply the same skill set to the world around them. It acts sort of like the missing link or the bridge between these pockets of belonging and the larger world. So you ready for this? So simple. Yet we often try to make things complicated, but yet these concepts are so powerful. So attribute 1, perspective taking. Now, this is the ability to set aside the framework of your own experiences and be willing to attempt in some way to step into the experience of others. Now, we can never do this completely, but we can begin to shift the awareness from our own tiny bubble to the real-life experiences and stories that comprise another person or another group's framework or viewpoint. Attribute 2, staying out of judgment. Now, this is a hard one. I don't know about you, but sometimes living in the judgment of others feels so good. And sometimes as a group, it feels doubly good to think, wow, we have it all together, and look at those people out there. They are a hot mess. Now, if we can begin to recognize when we're in judgment, say, hello, judgment, there you are again. We can begin to shift back into a space of openness during those moments. Now, this takes practice, this takes intention, and it takes slipping into judgment and then bouncing back out. It is in the returning that our framework begins to shift. Attribute 3 of empathy, recognizing emotion in another person or group. Plain and simple, this is the ability to lift our heads out of the comfort of our own group perspective and recognize the emotions that we see in others. Just looking and being able to name them, whether it's fear, anger, disappointment, joy, sadness, grief. Honing our group emotional intelligence. And the next step, and the next attribute in that recognition is found in attribute 4. Being able to communicate understanding of that emotion. So how do we then recognize the emotion, then reflect on a time when we have experienced that emotion ourselves? You know, the circumstances may be different, the viewpoint may be different, the entire framework may be different. But recognizing how we felt when we were in that emotion creates a new way of viewing others and our shared experience of life. So when we begin to foster this idea of collective empathy, we open up the possibility of bringing the experience of belonging far beyond the groups that we form. The cascading activity of this is a shift that is yearning to be expressed in this moment. And when we begin to practice this, we can turn possibility into a collective reality. And I'm ready for it. Are you?
I'm ready.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be ready too.
Let's do it. Well, isn't that the interest? Yeah, done. That's it. Okay, see you later. But isn't that kind of the interesting thing about it? Like, it feels like a lot of this conversation has been thoughts in the past. Of like, I've had these thoughts in the past, and yet we've never been where we are now. Yeah. And I mean, we could say that in any moment, right? Like, we've only ever been here. Right. You know, we've never been to this moment before. But it feels like there's the right information, the right experience, the right whatever it is that we as a collective have needed. The right things, the right stuff is available now in a way where it wasn't before. And so it's like, oh, yeah, now we can do this part of it differently, unlike we were able to do it before. Yeah. And like the whole collective empathy thing, I have to admit, is a little bit of a stretch, but I can see it. Like, I can see it now. I can feel it now.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to take some work.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But for me personally, I don't know when it was that I would have been first able to be like, yeah, that's going to happen. Or could
Well,
happen.
and collective empathy is the answer. You know, it is. If right now, simultaneously, every single person could practice that in the real way, poof. I mean, poof. It just would have just this cataclysmic shift.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of that, like, you know, when I was talking in the opening about, you know, just the shift that can happen just from allowing somebody to voice their stuff, even if it's stuff that like you vehemently disagree with, but just like, okay, go ahead, get it out. I think that plays, you know, like right into it. Like, people just don't feel like the other side like understands where they're coming from, and like that unwillingness to listen. But just saying, you know, that creating that space to allow somebody to be heard demonstrates like a willingness to have empathy. Yeah, and then I don't know. Like, empathy has been definitely something I've been working on for years now. But it's one of those things, you know, our imaginations are powerful, and I've enjoyed my work with it, because like when I am in strong disagreement with somebody, if I really put my imagination to work and my doubts, judgments, everything else aside, I can, you know, I don't know if it's tied into intuition or what, but I can really kind of get in the minds of people and see where some people they're coming from. And just like seeing that, then all of a sudden, again, you know, we can kind of start to find that common ground. Like, you know, it's really, when it all comes down to it, we all really want the same things in life generally. You know, we want to feel safe. We want to have food. We want to have shelter. We want to feel, you know, loved and seen, at least by, you know, a group, you know, some close people. You know, we really, you know, I don't think there's, you know, when you hear these arguments and people accusing like the other sides of being evil, they're just evil about this. And like, I really, you know, 99% of humanity, I think we really do want the same things.
Well, and with collective empathy, there are no sides. So this whole like conversation, I mean, yeah, there would be no sides, because it would not be that, you know, it would be this, I don't know, this just opening, you know, this opening, this kind of collective experience. It seems so far removed from our reality now, but hasn't all the amazing things that we've ever experienced in life, and the amazing inventions and the amazing advancements have always been at the point before been like this, something that was so far off? There's no way this could ever happen. There's no way that a small tube could go flying through the air and you could go from this place. There's just no way that could ever happen. And then it happens. And so, I mean, like you said, Dan, it's like we have exactly what we need now. I can feel it.
Yeah. I've been sitting here biting my tongue because I know you don't want me to say it, but it's like, if anyone out there is familiar with spiral dynamics.
I'm not hating on spiral dynamics.
I know.
You know the backstory to that.
Google it. Don't go all the way down the rabbit hole.
All the way down the spiral?
Unless you really want to. All the way down the spiral, yeah. But it really just outlines a brilliant way of looking at history and the evolutions of human consciousness. And we are at a place where we're moving into this other tier of what is, you know, potential becoming possibility. And so much of that is moving from the history of time that anyone alive on this earth has been through has always existed in needing to be right or wrong. this tier or this level, we're right and all the other ones are wrong. The next one, we're right and all the other ones are wrong. The next one, and they're usually in reaction to that which came before it. But we are like bridging into this new way where it's not about right and wrong. And I know, Chris, you talked about that before. And I think the thing we're going to see the most is embracing that. Like, we're not all going to immediately embrace this "I don't need to be right" thing. And the idea of not needing to be right doesn't mean we won't at times feel right or feel like we need to be right. I think it starts with just recognizing me feeling like I need to be right doesn't mean I have to make you feel like you need to be wrong.
Right.
And like, that's just this, like, if we could all do that, even if we have been into this place, I mean, I think we shift, right? So even if we have visited this feeling of like, yeah, it's not about right and wrong. All of this is necessary and it's amazing. Like when we're in those spaces, great. And then something happens and I'll get pulled into like, oh, that's so wrong, or whatever. Right.
Yeah.
But it's just like, just remembering to go to like, all right, even when I feel like when I feel the need to be right, I don't have to make you wrong. And so I can still hear you and still listen to you. And it doesn't diminish me.
Yeah.
I might have to shake it out a little bit, but it doesn't,
Shake it out.
and I think that's like, if that's the one takeaway,
Yeah.
It's a good one. That's step
Yep.
one.
Step one. Check.
Easier said than done, but it
Yeah.
takes one person at a time to demonstrate.
Yeah.
And see how it unfolds.
And it is a journey, isn't it? And in each part of the journey, we have tools that maybe we didn't have before. And it just seems like, it's that willingness to take those tools and now, okay, let's use what we got. And I think you're right. Now is the time is being called now for us to do that in a really powerful way.
Yeah.